Kim Do-hyun clutches his badge between his fingers and waits for coffee at the vending machine in his 32nd floor office when the screen goes dark, the lights flicker, and a brief message swirls across the chat: food delivery across the city has been disrupted. His colleagues laugh nervously, but no one moves away from the windows. A minute later, the boss demands everyone stay put, shoving the laptop into his bag. In the hallway, someone runs to the elevators, the doors don't open, people start pushing, and Do-hyun, pressed against the wall, sees someone's elbow cut someone's lip. He takes the stairs because people are shouting and climbing into the elevator, and almost immediately runs into the woman from accounting. She's sitting on a step, clutching her ankle and asking for help. Do-hyun looks back at the noise from above, picks up her bag, but not the woman herself, and goes downstairs. On the ground floor, the glass doors are already smashed in, the street is blaring with sirens and horns, people are hauling boxes out of the convenience store across the street. Do-hyun rushes in, gets shoulder slammed into the chest by a stranger, and grabs only a crumpled pack of crackers from the floor. The cash register is inaccessible, the security guard is lying face down at the counter, and someone is jumping over him with a bag of rice. Do-hyun wants to get another bottle of water, but a guy in a motorcycle helmet lifts the rebar, and Do-hyun backs toward the exit, hiding the crackers under his jacket. A bus with a broken windshield is parked at the intersection, the driver yelling that the bridge is blocked by the military. People are running in different directions, and Do-hyun is doing the same, although he doesn't know where, because his phone only contains snippets of news: logistics problems, distribution points closed, don't get out. He doesn't get to his apartment until evening. The entire building is noisy, someone is knocking on strangers' doors and demanding to open up. Do-hyun clicks 2 locks, checks the kitchen, and finds 1 bottle of water, soy sauce, and half an onion, already soft around the edges. He divides the water into caps, eats 1 cracker, and lies down fully clothed, but doesn't have time to fall asleep. A fight breaks out behind the wall, a child cries, then glass breaks loudly. Do-hyun takes a kitchen knife and stands barefoot in the hallway, listening to someone dragging something heavy down the corridor. In the morning, the mobile network is barely alive, and the neighbor next door writes in the chat room: whoever has food, I'll trade it for a watch. Then, 5 minutes later, for a laptop, and 10 minutes later, for anything. Do-hyun looks at the message and doesn't respond because he has nothing to trade himself. On the second day, a crowd gathers below near a truck carrying humanitarian aid, but the soldiers quickly push them away with rifle butts and cart away the boxes. Do-hyun sees this from the window, is angry with himself for not going out sooner, and yet he doesn't go down. The mere thought of the crush makes his hands cramp up. That evening, the neighbor, the same one from the chat, knocks on the door in person and asks for at least some water. Do-hyun holds his hand on the door and remains silent until the knocking gives way to a soft swearing and a heavy cough. Then silence reigns in the hallway, and it feels worse than the screaming. On the third day, he tries to eat onions with sauce, but his stomach twists so much that he bends over the sink. The faucet only comes out with air and the occasional dirty spit. His head spins, and Do-hyun sits right on the floor, leaning against the cabinet so as not to fall face first. That evening, someone breaks into the apartment across the street. A woman's shriek is heard, followed by the sound of stomping feet coming down the stairs. Do-hyun takes a step toward the door, freezes, then steps back and covers his mouth with his hand, because he can hear his stomach rumble louder than the other voices. A pale window flashes before his eyes, as if chipped from the inside of his eyelids. Food system activation during critical hunger. Do-hyun jerks, hits the back of his head on the cabinet, and whispers hoarsely, "Not now," but the window doesn't disappear. Line flashes inside the window: create a basic diet. He traces a finger in the void, more out of anger than faith, and a hot triangle of kimbap, a rice roll with seaweed, falls into his palm, the smell of sesame so pungent that it brings tears to his eyes. He bites into the food too quickly, chokes, doubles over, and then the window changes. Side effect: severe exhaustion upon creation. Do not overuse. His hands immediately become weak, his fingers tremble more violently than before eating, and Do-hyun slides back to the floor. When he comes to, his mouth still tastes of salt and rice, and the window displays a new tab: inventory, hidden storage without spoilage. He mentally pulls the empty package into it, and it disappears, and this is more frightening than the actual act of eating. Do-hyun creates another kimbap, just to see if he can, and is immediately struck by weakness. His ears are ringing, his vision is dark, his nose is bleeding. He understands without words that there is food, but he pays for each challenge with his body. There's another knock on the door, a hoarse voice from nearby begs for at least a crumb. Do-hyun takes a fresh roll, goes to the door, and holds it by the chain, but more footsteps are heard in the hallway, and he hides the food in his inventory without opening it. Behind the door, there's first a scolding, then a prolonged coughing fit. In the morning, the neighbor is lying in the hallway, his face gray, his lips dry, a discarded watch and a broken phone nearby. Do-hyun looks at him from a crack in the door, then closes the door, sits on the floor, and rubs his hands for a long time, as if he can erase what he didn't do. Around midday, the knocking comes again, but softer. A woman with a child from the third floor is standing, holding onto the wall. The boy can barely stand. Do-hyun sees the child licking his dry lips and pulling out a small loaf of bread, although he knows he'll collapse later. The woman grabs the bread with both hands and begins to thank her too loudly. At that moment, two men appear from the stairwell, and one is no longer looking at her, but at Do-hyun. He slams the door, and a second later someone punches it and demands to open it. He manages to put the food away and head toward the kitchen when the pounding on the door gets louder. The system displays the line food distribution support bonus, but Do-hyun only grimaces, because the door is barely holding up, and the bonus isn't currently locking the door. The men only leave when someone shouts from above that a fight over water has broken out below. Do-hyun slides down the wall, drenched in sweat, and a new item appears in the window, improving the product, better quality, lower the price of fatigue. He closes it without touching it. That night, the door of a neighbor who died in the hallway is broken down by other residents. Do-hyun hears them rummaging around inside and cursing that there's nothing there, and in the morning, on the wall next to his apartment, written in chalk, is the message, "Check here too." He realizes he can't stay, and he quickly stuffs his backpack with clothes and a knife, though he still keeps real food outside. Before leaving, he glances at the door opposite and lingers a second longer than necessary, but doesn't go there. Two men with rebar are already on the stairs, checking the apartments from bottom to top. Do-hyun is hiding between the pipes on the technical floor, waiting for them to pass, and for the first time, counting not the minutes, but how many more times he can summon food if he has to run all day. Outside, the neighborhood is already divided into small camps. Men with sticks sit at one entrance, allowing only their own people through. Do-hyun turns into an alley and sees a woman with that same boy on the pavement. They're alive, but now three strangers stand next to them, as if the new food has already assigned them owners. He pretends not to recognize them, continues along the wall, and only around the corner does he take out some bread from his inventory, but it's too late. Going back would mean drawing attention to them and himself too. He hides the bread back and walks faster, angry no longer at the city, but at himself. In an abandoned office near a metro station, he finds a windowless room and props the door shut with a metal cabinet. He summons only one meal, then lies on the floor and waits for the weakness to subside, and decides never again to show anyone the moment the food appears. The next day, he goes out to get water and encounters a wounded courier in the hall, clutching his side and asking not for food but for a bandage. Do-hyun gives him a pack of sandwiches from the supply closet in exchange for the addresses of where the generators are still working and where the gangs have appeared. The courier eats as he walks, speaking haltingly but to the point. The warehouse near the market is run by men with guns, the school has been turned into a guarded distribution point, and on the northern street they're cutting people to pieces for a sack of rice. Do-hyun writes everything down on the back of an advertising brochure and doesn't give his name. The courier returns in the evening, not alone, but with a teenager named Min-soo, and asks for a place to stay for the night. Do-hyun wants to refuse, but seeing Min-soo barely able to stand, he sets a condition: no entry into his room, no noise, no chatter about food. That night, Min-soo finally tries the doorknob, thinking Do-hyun is asleep. Do-hyun opens it abruptly and slams the door onto his shoulder. The boy falls, the delivery boy jumps up, and for the first time, the cramped hallway smells not of hunger, but of fear of the owner of the place. In the morning, Do-hyun kicks Min-soo out without breakfast, gives the courier half his rations, and tells him he's responsible for him. The courier nods silently, but his gaze is no longer grateful, but wary, and Do-hyun understands, power comes with hatred. The system opens a contract exchange of services with a small explanation next to it: simple condition, simple bonus. Do-hyun assigns the courier the task of collecting rumors about warehouses and immediately feels the blood pounding in his temples, as if even the system charges a fee for monitoring. That evening, a woman with a cut arm is brought into the hall, So-hee, a former nurse. She doesn't ask for food, but immediately offers her services, bandages, triage, and assistance with the sick, if she's not thrown out into the street. Do-hyun doesn't like her confident tone, but he leaves. So his first benefit comes quickly. She finds Minsu with a high fever and drags him to a separate corner, preventing him from infecting the others. Minsu cries and calls for his mother. The courier is angry that the boy was written off, and Do-hyun is forced for the first time to choose not rations, but a person. He gives Minsu food and a separate place, although so he warns that this is a risk for everyone. The system gives a bonus for supporting the weak, but at night Do-hyun's nose bleeds again, and in the morning the room is hot, his throat is cut, and he understands that he is paying for more than just fatigue. Minsu survives, and the courier begins to look to Do-hyun as a savior. Do-hyun doesn't like this, because everyone needs saviors, and he can't feed everyone equally. The system allows it, but his body doesn't. Two newcomers arrive through the side entrance, the loader, Park, and the silent cleaner, Jong, and offer security in exchange for food. Do-hyun posts them at the door one by one, but doesn't give them weapons better than pipes, because pipes are easier to take back. So he notices that his hands shake after every entry into the room and asks him point-blank if he's sick. Do-hyun answers sharply, too sharply, and she falls silent, but stops turning away when he returns pale after creating food. On the third evening, four men with hunting rifles appear at the entrance and demand to open the door to check supplies. Park is shaking so much he can barely hold the phone. Jong looks at the floor. The courier whispers, "We can't hold on," and Do-hyun realizes negotiations are inevitable. He comes out with a single box of noodles in his hands and offers a trade, food for the right to remain on the sidelines. The gang leader, nicknamed Taebeom, laughs, grabs the box, breaks one pack in half and demands to see the entire warehouse, simultaneously hitting Park on the knee with the butt of his gun. Park falls to the floor with a scream, the bone twisting unnaturally sideways, and Do-hyun, to avoid watching it for another second, pulls more food out of his inventory right behind him. Taebeom doesn't see the moment itself, but he sees the all-too-quick supply, and his eyes take on a completely different look. The gang leaves with a portion of the rations and a promise to return for a share, leaving Park with a shattered knee. So he's screaming that he'll rot without his medicine, the courier seeking revenge, and Do-hyun sitting against the wall, wet and empty, his body responding to the double challenge of food by vomiting. That evening, Park asks her not to cut his leg, even though no one has suggested it yet, so he is angry at Do-hyun for leading the gang on the trail, but for the first time, he doesn't argue, he simply gives her all the bandages he found and stays by her side while Park screams into a rag in pain. The next morning, the system displays a new entry, product improvement, limited medicinal quality. Do-hyun summons a simple broth, upgrades it to restorative, and almost immediately passes out. When he comes to, so he is holding him by the collar and hissing that he almost died too. Park feels better, but not enough to get up. In one evening, Do-hyun learns something important, food can heal only weakly, and his body breaks down faster than the group grows, and for the first time, profit stops seeming like a victory. The courier suggests leaving before the gang returns, while So-hee suggests keeping a low profile and closing the circle. Do-hyun hesitates too long, and others make the decision for him. Minsu steals 3 rations and tries to escape through the roof. Jong catches him on the stairs, a scuffle ensues, rations fall, one package rips, and the smell of food spreads through the floors. 5 minutes later, footsteps can be heard at the entrance, and Do-hyun realizes that his first small camp has given the signal itself. They leave at night through the back door, dragging Park along the door's removed canvas. So he walks ahead with a lantern, and Minsu sobs from fear and guilt. Do-hyun walks last, constantly looking not behind him, but at his own palms, to make sure they won't tremble again. They find a new base in a furniture warehouse near the river. It's damp and empty inside, but there are plenty of shelves and one hidden freight elevator. Do-hyun immediately divides the space. The upper level is for the people, the lower one is just for him, and this time no one argues. By morning, Park is feverish, the wound blackening at the edge, so he demands antibiotics, which are unavailable. The courier yells that it's all because of the deal with the gang, and Do-hyun goes to his room and stays there for a long time, because he understands that now the system will either help him or finish him off. He creates the soup, upgrades it twice, and after the second upgrade, a red sign flashes in the window, overload. Risk of collapse. Do-hyun falls to his knees, hits his face on the concrete, and when he crawls back to the others, so he is already looking at him as if he's a man with a secret, not just a reserve. The soup briefly brings down the fever, but by evening, Park is still dying, clutching the pipe he never let go of. The courier punches the wall, Minsu hides, and Do-hyun can't get closer than 2 steps because his head is pounding with the words, "I didn't save you." In the morning, Park's body is carried to the river. Jong remains silently with him until the end, and then, for the first time, speaks at length. If we're here, someone has to pay first. Yesterday it was him. Tomorrow, someone else. Do-hyun doesn't answer, but gives Jong a double ration, and the feeling is not relief, but anger. After Park's death, a rift appears within the group. The courier says Do-hyun isn't a leader, he's just a warehouse with legs, so he hears this and doesn't defend him, only looking to see who else will agree. Do-hyun realizes that trust can't be maintained with food alone. That evening, a woman with a map and a bandaged hand approaches the warehouse, Yunmi. She doesn't ask for shelter, but offers information about Taebyum's gang's routes in exchange for 2 portions of alcohol and a safe place to spend the night, separate from the others. Do-hyun accepts the deal, but places her not with the humans, but in an office cubicle on the 2nd level. Yunmi notices this and smirks, as if she sees him not as a master, but as someone afraid to sleep next to even their allies. She brings immediate benefits. Taebyum has not 1 warehouse, but 3 exchange points, and he himself is afraid of the war remnants who are collecting food in the gray zone, a closed area with a pass. Do-hyun listens silently, and Sohee, for the first time, openly asks where they got so much food. He replies harshly that the source is his business, and this only makes things worse, so he turns away. The courier grimaces. Yumi says nothing, but lingers her gaze on his pale face when he returns from downstairs after distributing. That same night, Minsu whispers to the courier that he saw an empty room with no drawers. They decide to check, and Jong catches them at the door. The fight is short but noisy. The courier gets cut. Minsu falls down the stairs and breaks his arm. Do-hyun doesn't hit them, but in front of everyone, he cuts their rations and closes off access to the upper level. The courier shouts that he has the right to know why the people around him are dying, and this hits home more accurately than any blow, because the others remain equally silent. The system awards a bonus for tough management, but the line is cold and unnecessary. Do-hyun looks at Minsu with his bandaged arm and realizes that any bonus pales in comparison to the child, who already fears him more than hunger. Yunmi returns with news. Taebyum's gang is gathering people to pressure the generous warehouse near the river. Do-hyun listens and immediately decides not to hide, but to get ahead of the situation, to start feeding the smaller groups around him through intermediaries, so that he'll have debtors. So he argues that this will only spread rumors, but he still does it his way. In one day, packages are sent through Chanda to neighboring groups, and by evening, the warehouse already knows someone nearby is handing out food without lines and with almost no strings attached. The result comes faster than he expected. 3 old men from the residential block come to the gate, asking not for rations, but for some food for the bedridden. Minsu looks at them and pulls Do-hyun's sleeve down, whispering, "Don't open it like you did then." Do-hyun finally opens the door and hands over the food, but that evening one of the old men returns with his nephew and 2 other men. They smile too politely and ask if they could discuss cooperation inside the warehouse. Jong pushes them out the door, but the warehouse is already marked as a resource site, so he can't take it anymore and tells Do-hyun bluntly that his pity and calculation are equally dangerous because they always lead strangers right to them. The next day, Taebyum arrives himself, not with 4, but with a dozen armed men. He throws a messenger bag in front of the gate, from which Minsu's tooth rolls out. The boy was seized when he went to fetch water without permission. The courier rushes out. Yunmi grabs him by the collar. Jong holds the gate, and Taebyum yells that he'll only return the boy alive for real stock. Do-hyun stands too quietly, and everyone around him thinks he's about to haggle again. He offers a third of their food and safe passage. Taebyum laughs and throws a finger through the crack, Minsu's little finger, wrapped in dirty tape, so he turns away. The courier howls, and Do-hyun's face goes blank, like the concrete beneath his feet. For the first time, he makes a mistake not in calculation, but in timing. He delayed the deal, thinking he could save minutes, but the child had already paid. He calls John and Yunmi, leaves Sohee in the warehouse, and goes to the exchange in person, although his knees are shaking even before he leaves. At the old car wash, Taebyum holds Minsu against the wall, the boy's face swollen, his left arm hanging limply. Do-hyun hands over the food in batches, dragging out the conversation while Yunmi walks around the back of the building, but Taebyum notices her shadow before he should. All hell breaks loose. A shot hits the concrete. Jong knocks someone down with a pipe. The courier they told him not to take runs anyway and lunges at Minsu. Do-hyun tries to summon food as a distraction and becomes so weak that he falls right between the hoses. From below, he sees Taebyum hit the courier on the temple with the handle, and Minsu, without getting up, reaches for the fallen knife. The boy doesn't make it in time. The next shot silences everything at once, and the car wash tiles become too red for such a small figure. Jong drags Do-hyun out, Yunmi fires from someone else's gun, missing but gaining seconds. They leave without the courier and without Min-soo, only with his jacket, which Jong grabbed instinctively as he pulled back. At the warehouse, so he first looks around for the boy, then sees the jacket and slaps Do-hyun across the face with an open palm. He doesn't respond, only sits down right on the floor by the gate, because he has no strength for either justification or anger. At night, the system issues a bonus for risky exchange, but underneath it, for the first time, a penalty appears: loss of trust in the group. Reduced network efficiency. Do-hyun looks at the lines and wants to smash everything he can against the wall, but of course, they're inside. In the morning, the courier is found alive by the canal, but with a broken voice and an empty gaze. He recognizes Sohee, but doesn't recognize Do-hyun, and at the sight of food, he begins to struggle as if he's about to be bought and sold again. After this, Do-hyun forbids himself from using the word deal out loud. Yunmi calls it a late shame, so he calls it a useless measure, and Young just silently rearranges the beds so that everyone sleeps further away from Do-hyun's door. The base has to be moved again because Taebyum now knows the area. During the move, the courier suddenly disappears with one of the middlemen and a box of rations, and Do-hyun doesn't even follow him. He has no strength, no trust either. The new location is a half-empty distribution center on the outskirts, with broken conveyor belts and a large freezer without power, so he says it no longer looks like a shelter, but like a future slaughterhouse. Here, for the first time, Do-hyun establishes not a camp, but an order: entry only through Jong, assistance only through Sohee, reconnaissance only through Yunmi, food only according to lists. His voice is even, but every rule sounds like an attempt to prevent a repeat of the car wash. The system opens distribution nodes, contact points, with a brief explanation: food through trusted contacts, bonus for dependency. Do-hyun watches for a long moment, then activates one node through a woman in the neighboring residential block, and within a day, he's receiving a flood of requests, like after a hole in the wall. Along with the requests, people from the gray zone, the remnants of the state, come. 3 men in identical bulletproof vests offer an official exchange: food and information in exchange for protection and access to a block with generators. Do-hyun asks for more time, but one of them immediately notices there's no sign of any real supplies in their warehouse, so he freezes. Yunmi moves her foot slightly toward her gun, and Jong takes a step forward as if he'd block the entire room if he had to. The people from the gray zone leave without a deal, leaving behind a dry warning: all major food flows will be accounted for. After them, Do-hyun hears Jong ask him a direct question for the first time: are they right? There's no warehouse here? And for the first time, he can't even answer with a lie. That night, so he enters his room without knocking and sees a bag of rice slowly gathering from the empty space above his palm. Both freeze. Do-hyun turns pale as if he'd already been hit, and so he doesn't scream, she just closes the door with her foot. He waits for her to recoil or demand an explanation, but so he puts the basin down on the table because his nose is bleeding again and says curtly, "That's why you always look like a corpse." There's no admiration in it, only weariness and anger. Do-hyun doesn't tell everything, just enough: the food system, summoning food, inventory, upgrading, paying with your body. So he listens, then asks the main question: if you get killed, will the food run out? And he doesn't know the answer, which only makes things worse. In the morning, she demands to know Youngwoo and Yunmi, otherwise the secret will finish off the group before the enemies. Do-hyun resists, but just then a woman from the distribution center appears at the gate, shouting that her neighbors are already slaughtering each other over rumors of endless food. Chaos erupts on the spot. Small groups converge on the center, all demanding direct access. Jong holds the gates with all his might. Yunmi screams that someone leaked the story of the bottomless warehouse. Do-hyun emerges and sees the city not as a map, but as hunger gathered at his door. He tries to hand out some of the food to appease the crowd, but after the third call, he's nearly blinded, and so he literally holds him up. The people outside only see the food coming, and they shout even louder. Kindness instantly turns into an invitation to storm. Yunmi makes a decision without him. She fires into the air and shouts that the distribution is closed. Anyone who tries to get any further will be left without a share forever. The crowd retreats not out of respect, but out of calculation, and Do-hyun sees for the first time how his power works through someone else's cruelty. Inside, he snaps at Yunmi, accusing her of provoking him, and she responds by throwing a note from Taebyum at his feet: "You're not a warehouse. You're a machine." The paper is crumpled and dirty, but the writing is clear enough that everyone in the room's expressions change. The secret is no longer a secret, even if not everyone knows its form. Jong asks to speak frankly, and so he speaks for him, because Do-hyun sits clutching his ribs, as if the system has tied them together with wire from the inside. The food is fed through him, and the more he gives, the closer he is to fainting. Jong is silent for a long time, then asks one question: do you feed people so they live, or so they stay close to you? Do-hyun doesn't have time to answer, because an explosion is heard outside. Someone blew up the side entrance with a homemade pipe bomb. The assault begins from two sides at once. Small groups, Taebyum's men, and someone from the gray zone all mingle in one muddy stream. Jong closes the main passage. Yunmi fires from the upper platform, so he drags the wounded behind the racks, and Do-hyun is useless for the first time just when he's needed most. He summons food anyway, dozens of small packages, and throws them toward one of the entrances to slow the onslaught. Some of the attackers do lunge at the packages right under each other's feet, and a brief melee ensues, but the system immediately penalizes him with an overload, and Do-hyun falls to his knees, choking on a cough. Taebyum bursts through almost simultaneously with the people from the gray zone. He sees Do-hyun on the floor and is already reaching for him like an object, but John slams into him with his entire body. Both fall onto the conveyor belt, and for a second the noise of iron drowns out even the gunshots. Yunmi jumps down to cover Young, takes a glancing bullet to the shoulder, and still hits Taebyum in the face with the butt of the gun, so he yells at Do-hyun to stand up somehow, because if he gets dragged away now, everyone here will be left without food and without a purpose. Do-hyun rises not out of strength, but out of fear of being pulled out of his own history. He activates the influence scaling previously blocked by Red, and the system responds: wide distribution, wide rollback. This is no longer a choice, but a full price. Packages of food begin to appear on the floor, on the conveyor belt, against the walls, dozens, hundreds, too quickly and too clearly. The attackers freeze for a second, someone crosses themselves, someone shouts that they've found the source, and it's that second that breaks the ranks more than any negotiations. People rush for food. The gray zone is no longer in the mood for an assault. Small groups grab bags and try to escape. Taebyum's gang is no longer fighting for the warehouse, but for the right to steal more than others. A dirty war of all against all begins within the center, and Do-hyun himself has caused it with nothing. The shock comes immediately. His fingers are so cramped that they won't straighten. Blood is coming not only from his nose but also from his mouth, so he falls next to him, holding his head, and Yunmi, limping, yells at Young to drag them to the freezer, the last room with the thick door. Jong drags Do-hyun inside literally by the collar, followed by Sohee with a first aid kit and Yunmi with an empty pistol. Outside, gun butts are already pounding on the iron. Strange voices can be heard. Some are demanding food, others Do-hyun himself, and now everyone knows exactly what they want. It's cold and cramped inside, with old ice on the floor and broken boxes in the corner. Do-hyun tries to summon something for the three of them, but the system responds in gray: restoration unavailable, overload critical. For the first time, no food is coming, as if the source itself can shut down too. Chan, covered in blood, laughs shortly and hollowly. So many people die for endless food, and at the right moment they sit in an empty freezer without a piece of bread. No one argues with him, because there is nothing left to argue with. So he bandages Yunmi, then looks at Do-hyun and asks without malice, if we get out, will you do the same thing again? He is silent for a long time, hearing knocks on the door, then answers hoarsely, no. Worse. Otherwise, they'll eat us. Yunmi smiles through the pain and says that this finally feels like honesty. They start burning the door with a blowtorch from outside, smoke billowing through the crack, and Jong gets up, although he can barely stand, because sitting and waiting is worse for him than dying standing. Do-hyun remembers the hidden cargo tunnel under the freezer, which he hadn't even told his own people about. Jong finds a hatch under a broken pallet, knocks it out with a pipe, and a narrow shaft descends to an old canal. Yunmi laughs, a truly evil laugh. Even now you're keeping the trump card for yourself. They descend one by one, first Yunmi, then Sohee, then Do-hyun, whom John literally lowers with his hands. When John himself climbs after him, the freezer door is finally torn off from the outside, and shadows appear in the opening with lanterns and screams. Chan doesn't have time to close the hatch, only throws the pipe down and jumps himself. One of the attackers fires into the shaft, the bullet grazing the metal. Chan falls and lands on the concrete of the canal, too heavily to get up immediately. The air below smells of stagnant water and rust, while lanterns are already shining through the hatch above. So he and Yunmi are dragging John by the shoulders. Do-hyun is last, nearly falling over with every step, because after the scaling, it's as if the system has scraped everything unnecessary out of him, including fear. They emerge into a sewer by the river, the voices of the chase still audible behind them, but now fainter. Jong is coughing up blood and quietly murmuring that they can't drag him any further, and Do-hyun, for the first time in a long time, asks, rather than orders, them to walk a little further. Jong only reaches the concrete ledge under the bridge and sits down there, leaning against a column. He refuses the last ration, which they don't have anyway, and tells Do-hyun to look not at those he can buy, but at those he's already lost. While he tries to stop the bleeding, Yunmi looks outside and reports that people from the gray zone are already prowling by the river. Their escape didn't save them, they simply entered a different hunting circle. The system finally responds with a faint line, rebooting after overload. New mode available, debt node powered by obligation. Do-hyun reads aloud, and even in the darkness, so he can see how tense she is, because this no longer sounds like help, but like a new form of the chain. He closes the window without activating it and helps Chan lift, though he can barely put any weight on his leg anymore. Ahead, a gray zone motorboat hums along the river. Behind them, metal clanks in the sewer. They're caught between the old regime and the new greed. Yeonmi suggests splitting up so at least someone can leave, so he refuses outright. Young remains silent, and Do-hyun, for the first time, doesn't look for the best option alone. He watches them and waits for them to decide together, as if it's too late, but he's still learning along the way. The decision is interrupted by a spotlight from a boat. The light cuts through the darkness, and a voice echoes through a megaphone across the water, urging surrender to the owner of the food source. Do-hyun hears this and, for the first time, realizes that he has become not a person with a resource, but the resource itself. He takes a single packet of rice from his inventory. The restoration barely managed to bring back such a small amount, and divides it between the four of them, using his hands. No one eats right away, because what's more important isn't hunger, but the fact that the gesture is finally not about submission, but about equal sharing. Jong eats first, as if settling an argument with a single movement, so he eats second, never taking her eyes off the spotlight. Yoonmi eats third, quickly and angrily. Do-hyun takes the last piece and realizes that the taste of rice no longer signifies satiety, but rather a choice of who exactly he'll be with for the next round. The boat draws closer, the gang's footsteps can be heard in the sewer behind them, and there's no time left for a clean exit. Yunmi checks her empty pistol as if it were a habit, so he presses her palm to John's side. Do-hyun opens the system and sees two options, hide or spread. Hide promises the chance to disappear at the cost of losing all nodes and influence. Spread, a new level of networking at the cost of complete exposure and constant hunting. Do-hyun reads silently, then looks up at his own people, no longer hiding the screen, and this is more important than the choice itself. Yunmi looks first and nods briefly, as if to say, at least now there will be no lies, so he exhales through her teeth. Jong smiles with difficulty, the spotlight shines directly on them, orders are already being shouted from above, and Do-hyun points his finger to one of 2 points. At that moment, the hungry fires of small groups who had managed to snatch his food during the assault suddenly flare up on the other bank. Dozens of people are already dependent on him, without even seeing his face, and the city itself transforms his ability into a power from which there is no simple escape. Do-hyun presses the button, but the reader sees only a white flash from the interface on his face, not the option itself. By the river, people from the gray zone are shouting simultaneously, footsteps are running in the sewer, and he stands between them, empty-handed, from which food came last time, and from which a new order may come next. The light goes out as abruptly as it came on, and for a second everyone around, friends and foes alike, freezes, as if the city had inhaled and not exhaled. So he takes a step closer to Do-hyun. Yunmi turns to the river. Jong lifts the pipe with both hands. The first warning shot rings out across the water from above. Someone shouts Taebyum's name in the darkness behind him, and Do-hyun feels the system reconfiguring itself inside him, not like a window, but like a heavy heat beneath his ribs, and it is in this new, as yet unnamed mode that the story ends not with a full stop, but with a taut wire. The gray zone boat shines its searchlight directly onto the concrete beneath their feet, the beam ripping across the walls like a knife. A megaphone commands them to lie face down, and from the sewer behind them, they can already hear Taebyum's men arguing over who will be the first to get the warehouse man. Do-hyun steps to the side, blocking So-hee from the beam, and responds not with words, but with a sharp toss of food onto the wet slope by the water. Dozens of packages slide down, the people on the boat reflexively reach for them, and the formation breaks for a second. Yunmi doesn't waste a second, throwing an iron hook from an old net at the spotlight. The glass shatters, the light goes out, and the shore is drowned in screams. So he pulls John into the shadows under the bridge, and Do-hyun almost falls, because the new regime is tearing at his strength faster than the old one. 2 of the gang members emerge from the darkness of the sewer, one lunging at Do-hyun, the other at Yunmi. Jong, barely standing, hits the first one in the neck with a pipe, while Yunmi knees the second one in the groin and wrestles the knife from him, but collapses onto the damp stones herself. The gray zone opens fire into the darkness, almost blindly, and the bullets no longer distinguish between targets. One of Taebyum's men falls into the water, the second screams that the source must be taken alive, and this scream only further confuses everyone around. Do-hyun, clinging to the wall, summons not food but a death node to the nearest group around the campfires. The interface briefly flashes an explanation. Whoever has eaten the food receives a call, and on the other bank, several figures suddenly look up, as if hearing their own name. Those very survivors who grabbed his rations after the assault run to the river not on orders, but out of an instinctive sense of duty, each with his own weapon, hammer, shovel, rebar. The gray zone is forced to turn toward the new threat, and the line of attack breaks again. For the first time, so he sees the system's workings not as food, but as a web of dependency, and her expression changes from fear to cold disgust. She nevertheless continues bandaging John, because choosing feelings is more valuable than choosing bullets now. Yunmi grabs Do-hyun by the collar and hisses that he no longer feeds people, but gathers them by scent, like dogs. He wants to answer, but instead of words, he doubles over from coughing, and dark blood remains on his palm, too thick for ordinary overwork. Taebyum's gang finally reaches the shore in a tighter formation, Taebyum himself last, with a broken cheekbone and someone else's gun. Seeing Do-hyun alive, he doesn't scream, but smiles too calmly, like a man who no longer doubts why he's killing. He offers everyone a simple deal. Whoever takes Do-hyun alive gets the food first. Even some of the smaller groups freeze at this, and in a second, Do-hyun feels his price become a common figure for everyone. John rises to his feet, though his knee can no longer support him, and stands before Do-hyun, as if he's shielding not a person, but the meaning of his final days. Taebyum fires almost immediately, the bullet entering John's collarbone, but he still manages to drop the pipe. The pipe doesn't kill Taebyum, only breaks his wrist. The gun falls into the water, and a close fight ensues on the shore. Yunmi lunges for her weapon, so he yells at Youngun not to lie down, and Do-hyun, for the first time, doesn't retreat, but walks straight into the melee, even though his legs are shaking. He summons food right under the feet of the fighters, not to feed, but to knock them down. Slippery packages of rice and soup scatter across the mud, people slip, fall on each other, and the chaos becomes thicker than smoke over the river. The new regime immediately takes a toll. The interface flashes a red line reading obligations grow, personal autonomy declines. Do-hyun blinks, as if in disbelief, but he already sees, the more he pulls people into knots, the less room there is for simple escape. One of the gray zone fighters rushes forward with a stun gun, aiming not at Do-hyun's chest, but at his neck, so he manages to push him to the side. The shot goes into her shoulder, and she falls to her knees, unable to breathe for a second. It's not a calculated price, but a living, instant one, and Do-hyun reacts too late. He grabs the fighter by the bulletproof vest, takes an elbow to the jaw, falls waist deep into the water with him, and there, choking, he headbutts him in the face, as only a cornered office worker can. Yunmi drags him by the collar, shouting that so he can't move her left arm. Jong sits by a column, blood trickling down his side and collecting in a dark puddle near his boot, and Taebyum, clutching his broken wrist, yells at his men to retreat further up the bank and shoot from a distance. Do-hyun realizes they won't survive a protracted fight and opens the system again. Now a sidebar flashes, mass distribution reduces aggression briefly, and it sounds almost like a mockery, but there's no choice anymore. He throws the food not in handfuls, but in a wave up the slope, toward the stairs to the embankment, where just a second ago Taebyum's men were walking. Some of the small groups rush off after the loot, some are shooting at each other over the packages, not over him, and the front finally crumbles. The gray zone tries to retreat to the boat, but one of the engines stalls because someone hungry has already jumped aboard. The noise over the water is so loud that the crews are drowned in their own echoes, and Do-hyun sees for the first time how the city is tearing apart the old regime with its bare hands. In this mess, Yunmi grabs him by the elbow and points to a side passage in the concrete wall, a service tunnel to the pumping station. They drag Jong there, so he walking on her own, but very poorly, with a dead left arm and clenched teeth. Taebyum notices their departure and follows them, not with the crowd, but almost alone, as if it were his personal duty. At the entrance to the tunnel, he catches up with them so close that Do-hyun hears his horse breathing before his steps. John turns with one last effort and holds Taebyum in the doorway. They fall together onto the wet concrete. Taebyum hits John in the wound. John chokes him with his forearm, and Yunmi yells at Do-hyun not to stand there, but to leave while the passage is not blocked. Do-hyun doesn't leave right away. He takes a step back toward them, and it's that pause that nearly costs everyone their lives. Taebyum breaks free, fires blindly, the bullet rips off a chunk of concrete near Doohyun's temple. Jung croaks, "Go on, damn it," and only then does Yunmi literally push him into the tunnel. The three of them leave, hearing a brief scuffle behind them, a thud, then a deafening silence, all too clear without explanation. So he doesn't turn around, Yunmi doesn't either, and Doohyun does turn around once and sees nothing but a dark doorway. The pumping station turns out to be half flooded, reeking of fuel oil and old mold. It's quiet for only the first few seconds, then footsteps can be heard from above. Someone has figured out the direction, meaning even this one won't offer salvation for long. So he finally sits down on the wet floor and says, without looking at Doohyun, that Young died not for the food or the plan, but for the people around him. Yunmi adds dryly that now they have no one left to hold the door if Doohyun decides to be smarter than everyone else again. Doohyun silently opens the interface, and the new line cuts like a bullet: Keynode lost, network unstable. Jong is no longer a person in the system, but a structural element, and this makes Doohyun feel almost physically sick. He closes the window and, for the first time, doesn't try to immediately fix it with action. Instead, he takes the spare center pass from around Chan's neck, which is still hanging in his pocket, and places it on the concrete in front of him, as if finally admitting who exactly he's lost. Voices from the gray zone descend from above the stairs, no longer a crowd, but a search party of three, neat and disciplined. Yunmi looks at Soi, at Doohyun, and quietly says that if they get cornered now, she won't be able to negotiate on her own. Then Doohyun does something he's never done before. He takes out the food openly, in front of both of them, but instead of handing it out, he asks what to do next. He doesn't assign roles, but asks for a joint decision, and this hesitation itself sounds more unusual than the gunshots. So he doesn't take the package right away, looking at it as both a source of hope and salvation, then tells them to go not deeper, but upward, to those who already depend on their food. Yunmi nods. It's too late to hide. They need to gather their own before the enemies gather their enemies. Doohyun activates the det node more broadly than before, but now with a new condition, not subordination, but a gathering at a single point. The line change and commitment model scrolls across the interface, and he himself is unsure if this is even possible, but the system accepts. At the other end of the district, several small groups are called upon at once, not by hunger, but by the promise of shared protection. Those who yesterday were squabbling over bags are now turning toward the old pumping station, because the choice between solitary death and someone else's network is too clear. Gray Zone enters the hall with the first three, sees Doohyun, two wounded women, and open food on the floor, and the commander almost smiles, considering them already taken. Doohyun responds unexpectedly calmly, "It's too late. I'm not alone anymore." Outside, the footsteps of small groups are already rushing up the stairs, at first sparse, then dense. The fighters in the Gray Zone hear this and, for the first time, lose their perfect posture, because the authorities are having trouble working when a hungry crowd is heading to the door not for rations, but for their place in the next distribution. Doohyun stands on the concrete platform in front of the pump station, the crowd behind him roaring, and in front of him, Kang's men with shields and guns begin to move down. He raises his hand not to stop them, but to keep his own from panicking. Kang goes first, grinning and shouting that this will all be over faster if Doohyun just steps forward. Several people in the crowd behind Doohyun begin to shift their weight, assessing whether the risk of eating someone else's life is worth it. So he sharply calls out the names of the wounded she helped during the night and points to those already in position. She makes people remember specific faces rather than food, and this keeps some of the crowd from disintegrating. Yunmi fires a short burst from the upper platform, not penetrating but disrupting the rhythm of the attack. Kang waves his hand, and his men speed up, moving into a tight attack to crush the entrance before the crowd can decide who to follow. Doohyun activates the node only for those already standing nearby and holding their positions. The interface briefly flashes shared risk active, and in that same second, he feels the fear and pain of those around him echo within him. The first blow lands on the ladder. The carpenter gets hit in the shoulder by the butt of the rifle and falls, and Doohyun bends along with him, losing his breath. He struggles to get up, realizing that now every wound in the net is his own burden. He still gets the food out and throws it not into the crowd, but right at the feet of the attackers. Several fighters slip, break formation, and for a second the space between them is torn apart. Kang notices that Doohyun isn't backing down and rushes forward himself. Bypassing his own people, he grabs him by the collar and slams his head against the railing, hissing that people like him should work for those who know how to hold on to power. Doohyun, unable to break free, takes out a boiling packet of soup and presses it into Kang's face. He screams, releases his grip, and Yunmi finishes him off with a shot to the arm from above, knocking the weapon away. At this moment, the crowd behind Do-hyun doesn't scatter for the first time, but takes a step forward, not out of faith, but because there's nowhere left to retreat. Several people grab the fallen weapons and begin to fight back together. The gray zone appears from the side, attempting a flanking attack, but runs into the very survivors who arrived at the hub. A short, brutal, teamless battle ensues, with no one fully in control anymore. Do-hyun summons food again, but now he feels his body giving out, his vision is blurring, his hands are numb. The interface flashes the overload near warning, but he ignores it. So he grabs his shoulder and yells at him to stop because he's literally falling with every blow he gets to the others. He pushes her hand away because if he stops now, everything will fall apart. Khan, his face burned and his arm broken, rises and advances again, no longer for control but for personal revenge. Around them, the fight fragments into small skirmishes, and the space shrinks to just the two of them. For the first time, Do-hyun doesn't try to win with his mind, he charges forward and crashes into Khan, knocking him to the concrete. They fight roughly, without technique, and at some point, Do-hyun realizes that he's simply weaker. At that moment, the interface flashes a new line, node expansion, all in radius. He knows this will finish him off, but he presses it because there is no other way out. Wave passes through the hall, people, both tied and untied, freeze for a second, as if simultaneously struck by the same thought. Those who were on the verge of escape suddenly return to the fight. The price comes instantly. Do-hyun falls, shaking, blood already coming from his mouth, so he rushes to him. Yoon-mi descends, leaving her position. But the battle changes. People who a moment ago were fighting for themselves begin to act as a single line. Khan finds himself cut off, his men retreat, and the gray zone loses the ability to push through the center. Kan, caught between the crowd and the wall, tries to break through, but three people knock him down at once. Someone hits him too hard, and he doesn't get up again. The shooting dies down not on command, but because the men are running out of strength. The gray zone retreats, taking its own, and for the first time in forever, only heavy breathing can be heard at the pump station. Do-hyun lies on the concrete, barely feeling his body, and hears the people around him arguing, not about him, but about what to do next. He is no longer the center of the conversation, and this is strangely more painful than the blows. So he checks his pulse and tells him that if he uses the system like that again, he won't be able to get up. Her voice is no longer angry, but tired, and there's no confidence in him that he will even hear. Yoon-mi sits down next to him and quietly says that now everyone knows the truth. She doesn't ask what to do, she simply states that it's impossible to hide any longer. People begin to gather around, but not in one dense mass. Some keep to themselves, others come closer. There is no fear or worship in their gazes, only appreciation. The carpenter rises with a bandaged shoulder and says they've held the place, but they can't survive much longer. They need order, not just food. Several people nod, and the conversation shifts from Do-hyun to the general problem. Do-hyun struggles to his elbow and speaks for the first time not as the owner of the resource, but as one of them, that he won't be able to feed everyone all the time and that the network is no longer under his complete control. There's no shout in response, just a heavy pause. Someone asks what's left, and Do-hyun doesn't answer right away, because for the first time, he doesn't have a ready-made solution. So he speaks for him. The agreement remains, not through fear, but through rules that will bind everyone. Yoon-mi adds that if anyone tries to turn this into a market again, they will be stopped, not with words. Do-hyun closes the interface without activating the new functions, and for the first time, this feels like a choice, not weakness. He looks at the people, at the wounded, at the empty hands, and understands that control has already gone. Footsteps are heard again outside the pumping station, not an assault, but the movement of a city that has learned of them. Do-hyun remains standing, no longer the sole source of food, but a point around which something greater than himself now revolves.